Now, we're going to start Genesis 4 this evening and next week. We have finished up Genesis 3. Now, at this point, we're going to go 4 and 5 in much more broad senses. Genesis 4 will be a little bit more detailed than Genesis 5. Genesis 5 will speculate wildly about the age of the people and why they lived so long and what that means and stuff. So we'll have some fun with chapter 5 after the new year. But we'll slow down again when we get to chapter 6. But now that we've successfully gone through chapters 1 and 2, and we put creation together, and in chapter 3 dealt with a lot of the poetic ideas that begin tearing the world apart, what happens now in chapters 4 all the way through 11 is the world is just, having been exiled from the garden, humanity is just going to get worse and worse and worse until they get to Babel, and God says, "That's it, I'm done with this, you are no longer my people." But we're not there yet. Humanity has been exiled from the garden. Humanity as a whole is living in exile, having faced the judgment of their rebellion. We've talked enough about the first rebellion. We've talked enough about the judgments and the curses and the consequences for their rebellion. And now we get Adam and Eve's kids. They're going to start having kids, and those kids are going to do what kids do. Not listen, that yes, because Cain will definitely not listen to the Lord, but I was going to say fight. Kids fight. Well, one kid fights the other kid. The younger brother is sweet and doesn't do anything wrong. So, who has older siblings, or who's the older sibling? You're the older sibling? Out of how many? Seven total. Okay. Second to oldest. You were the oldest, growing up in the house. Okay. Oldest out of 3 growing up in the house. Anybody else? You got like a 12, 13-year gap between you and your brother? That's a very different, yeah, really? That's a very different dynamic. Me and my sister, my older sister and I are 18 months apart, and we did nothing but fight while we lived together. We get along much better now that we're no longer in shared space day after day, like our bathroom. Roger? You were the middle child. Wow, 2 sisters older and 2 sisters younger. Wow. that I'm going to be honest with you, that's a dynamic I do not wish to live through myself. Oh, okay. Oh. Okay. Well, me and my sister fought all the time. 2 older sisters and 1 younger sister, so also the only boy. Yeah. Jared, you get along with your brother? Yeah? Ish? As much as brothers can be expected to get along, maybe? So you're the baby. You get special dispensation. I was the baby too, but only out of 2 instead of 3. Second only child, baby. Yeah. Wow. 13 years to your brother, and then when you were 19, wow. That is not a dynamic I can really comprehend. I like listening. We were at Chuck E. Cheese a few months back. I like listening to Jeff tell me about, coming to Chuck E. Cheese for your birthdays and stuff. But he was a teenager and driving and stuff, and so he'd be in his own car and leave and whatnot when he wanted to and stuff. I couldn't imagine coming to a younger sibling's birthday in my own car at a Chuck E. Cheese, right? I was Driving from your own apartment when she's being... Nope, I really can't wrap my head around this. That is a dynamic that I cannot understand, but I bet to some degree because it limited your contact, it limited your ability to fight. Yeah. This initial sibling rivalry in the Bible is a story that most people know and interpret some way, shape, or form. What I want to do tonight is I want to talk about the story, the plot, but I really want to kind of probably stop tonight with talking about the character of Cain. Because I refer to Cain as the first human dark lord. I want to talk about what that means today. So let's read the passage. We're going to start in verse 1 and read through verse 16, but we're not going to get all the way through 16 until next week. So, Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." We'll talk about that translation and meaning in a second. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you so angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? If you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." We've already talked about that idea of desire from the woman's judgment, where her desire will now be to rule over her husband, but he will be master of her, governor of her, as the sun, moon, and stars govern time in chapter 1. And so here we see the negative context again. The desire of sin to rule, to master, but God says Cain not only can, but must actually rule over his own desires and impulses. And that's what we want to talk about a bit tonight. But let's keep reading through verse 16. Now, Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" Keep that word keeper in mind. Then the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence, and I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So let's see if we can get through maybe around verse 8 or 9 here today. Now, verse 1, Eve gets pregnant. She has their first recorded baby. Is this their first baby? Probably. Ultimately, we don't know. It's just going to focus on 3 of their kids: Cain, Abel, and then later Seth. That's all the only ones we actually get names for. So technically, this doesn't have to be the first baby, but we're going to treat it as if Cain is the firstborn. Because, in part, how she describes him and his expectations maybe for himself. So this is very oddly phrased Hebrew. Literally, it says, "I have acquired a man, Yahweh," not "with the help." The NIV adds that phrase, "with the help." It's not in the Hebrew text. Is it implied? Kinda. It's one of those things where technically you're not wrong for adding it because it doesn't make any sense in English if you don't, but it's not technically there. And so the idea of saying, "I have acquired a man, Yahweh," sounds a little bit different than saying, "With Yahweh's help, I brought forth a man." And so you can see that. And if you take that a literal idea into account, maybe she's not boasting, but maybe she's assuming that her firstborn, Cain, would naturally be the seed that God promised in the previous chapter. This would make the most sense of Genesis and the overall Bible stories. Hey, I brought forth a man, Yahweh. Look, God, the seed, the man. Is this the one that you promised? However, what we get here is, we've talked already last week about the pattern of, sin, judgment, with grace mixed in, exile, but the promise of redemption. Part of the way that promise is going to play out in the book of Genesis and throughout the rest of the Bible is that the firstborn son is often going to be passed over, and a younger son is going to have the rights of the firstborn, meaning the right to take his father's place when his father's time comes, to be head of the family, to receive a double portion of the inheritance. If the way that it would work is the firstborn son would be the only son who receives a double inheritance. What happens is if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sons or children, because this can apply to daughters. We don't see it happening too much because most daughters get their inheritance from their husbands. But Hebrew women were not barred under the law from inheriting. But what happened is if you had 5 sons, you split your inheritance into 6. The firstborn gets 2 shares and all the other kids get 1 share. Because he's supposed to be taking care of his mother with that money. He's supposed to be taking care of the family as the head of the family, investing it and doing proper things with it to actually take care of the community. So in the Bible, you get the firstborn rights are often passed over by the literal firstborn, so that the firstborn is not Esau, but Jacob, born second, and he gets the rights of the firstborn, which means Isaac's estate is split 3 ways. Jacob gets 2 shares, Esau would get 1, right? Abraham's firstborn son is Ishmael. He gets driven out by Sarah and sent away, and Isaac becomes his sole heir. But after Sarah dies, Abraham gets remarried and has a bunch more kids. He gives them all gifts and sends them away. And he says, the only inheriting son that I'm going to have, my second-born son is my only inheriting son, my firstborn here. This firstborn language is used of Jesus. It's used of Israel as a whole. Israel is not the first nation, but it's God's firstborn in the book of Exodus. He's the inheriting nation of God's people. The firstborn is that notion. So Cain, in this firstborn sense, would be expected to be the inheritor and could possibly be the seed. So this is what the story is doing. And this is what the story is going to do throughout Genesis, which is why we want to pay attention to it now. You get an option. God says, a seed is going to be born from the woman. Okay, here's a seed born from the woman. Here's an option. Is this the seed? And what's happened is the Bible is going to give us options, and essentially those options are going to disqualify themselves one way or another. So here, Cain, the firstborn son, is passed over and disqualified for the sake of a younger son receiving God's blessing instead. And the Bible talks about this. Humans don't get to decide whom God will use and how He will use them. God elects His chosen servants without regard for our expectations and desires. And this is exactly what Paul is talking about in Romans 9, where he talks about, quoting Malachi 1, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. Not in the sense of I don't like Esau, but in the sense of I haven't chosen Esau for what I have chosen Jacob for. Jacob is the bloodline of the seed. So, what I want you to see is that Eve's response here, I have acquired a man, Yahweh, could be alluding to the idea that she might think that Cain is this promised seed. But as we obviously know, because Cain is infamous, he's not the seed. And we have to go on asking the question, well, then who's the seed? Because Abel is born, but the Hebrew foreshadowing in the name probably doesn't mean that Abel's the seed, because Abel is the Hebrew word for breath. In the short story, it foreshadows his fate. His life will be like a breath, coming and going extremely quickly. Breath. The story is setting up the idea. Is Cain the seed, or is the breath going to be the seed? And it has to answer the question for both of them. Because the Bible has now set up, Genesis has now set up, that we should expect a seed. And all of the narrative stories that are coming in the book of Genesis are going to be to explain to us who is the seed. Cain is the first option. Abel is the second, but the foreshadowing of Abel's name likely means we shouldn't expect Abel to be the seed. But we read on in verses 2 through 5, and we get more of the story. We know the story, so we don't have to spend a lot of time here. The brothers bring offerings. Now, these are offerings. These are not sacrifices. Keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to what that means and how we should read the story. So, note the structure of the story here. Abel's a shepherd. Cain is a farmer. Cain brings fruits from the soil as an offering to God, and then Abel brings fat portions of his animals from the firstborn of his flock. Now, if you're following and tracking on firstborn notions, this hint that Abel is actually offering his firstborn ties into the story, asking, well, then is Abel the firstborn, So the result in the end of verse 4 and verses 5 is, of course, the obvious. Yahweh looks with favor on Abel's offering, but not on Cain's. Then Cain, of course, gets very angry. His face falls, his countenance falls. What does that mean? Your face falls and your countenance falls. It's an idiom. It's a Hebrew idiom. What does it mean? Because it's been passed along to us like this from like King James English. But that's not really the Hebrew phrase, but the meaning is the same. But what does that mean? Dejected. I don't hate that translation. Dejected seems, on the outside, it seems like, okay, he's angry because God dejected him. If you wanted to keep the word dejected, I would have to write out a sentence that makes it actually sound more like what Cain is actually doing. He's rejecting God, and we'll come to that in just a second. So your face falls, your countenance falls. What do you got, Jared? Despondent? Despondent. He got angry and was despondent? Cain was furious, and he looked despondent. Looked despondent. Interesting. Zoned out and despondent seems zoned out. I could see that. So that's interesting. I kind of like that. I really don't care how you translate or what translation you use. They're all tapping into something valuable here. But the idea is that his attitude is shifting. He was willing to bring God an offering, but now he's angry and he's upset, and his outlook on the situation and his actions from his outlook are going to change. His attitude, his inner heart are going to shift down a bad road, as we know. So, why the outcome and what can we learn from it? Why does God accept Abel's but not Cain's sacrifice? Now, we actually talked about C.I. Scofield in a little bit. I mentioned him in Wednesday Conversations because I was referring to what Pastor Terry mentioned on Sunday morning about the Scofield Bible being alternate lyrics to the solid rock that always came to mind. C.I. Scofield was a preacher at the turn of the 1800s and the early 1900s, and he was one of the first modern writers to put his study notes into a bound Bible and sell it. So the C.I. Scofield Study Bible around the early 1920s or something, whenever this was one of the first modern study Bibles to happen. So he's rather famous for his study Bibles. Well, he popularized the idea. He wasn't the originator of it, but he's the guy who did the modern popularization of the idea that Abel brought living blood sacrifice and Cain did not. And that's why God accepted Abel's sacrifice but didn't accept Cain's sacrifice. This is a popular idea, but it's a deeply flawed interpretation. It works based off caricatures of the sacrificial system of the Old Testament. It comes from reading Hebrews 9:22 into Genesis 4. Hebrews 9:22 is without blood, the forgiveness of sins is not possible. There's just one problem here. Bringing offerings is not the same as bringing a sacrifice. A sacrifice is about blood. An offering does not need to be. This is not for their sins. This doesn't say anything whatsoever about Cain and Abel sinned, and so they brought sacrifices to the Lord, right? If that was the case, Schofield would be right, and this popular interpretation of Cain's rejection would be right, but this is not the case. We need to understand the sacrificial system better, because under the sacrificial system, bringing fruits and offerings is perfectly legitimate. You can do that if they're an offering, because an offering is not a sacrifice. Okay, we'll come more on this in just a second. So, the idea that Cain is rejected because he doesn't bring something with blood undermines the actual lesson that Genesis 4 is trying to teach us. The author has an idea in mind, and it is completely irrespective of whether or not you bring a living animal in this case, okay? So, an offering and a sacrifice, not the same thing. It is most definitely offering here, not blood sacrifice, because the word for offering is used 3 times in Hebrew. The word for sacrifice isn't used at all. He's laying it on thick, letting you know that these are not atonements for sin. These are free will offerings. These are just gifts that they're bringing to God. Offerings are free gifts given to God that do not require blood payment for sin. The fact that Cain is bringing food from the harvest is not a problem. Leviticus 2 is entirely a chapter about, if you're going to bring a grain offering to the Lord, here's what I want. Here's how you do that. Because it's not a burnt offering like chapter 1. If in chapter 1, the burnt offering in Leviticus is about atoning for sin, once your sins are atoned for, you bring offerings. You can bring as many offerings as you want. So, if the problem is not that Cain is bringing fruits and vegetables, crops that he grew, what is the problem? What is the problem with Cain's offering? Any suggestions? Any thoughts? It's not the first of his crops? Okay. Abel says he's bringing the first born of his stuff? Okay. Roger? Had a worm in the apple. The author doesn't tell us those details, but maybe, you know. But here's the point that I'm trying to make. Any Hebrew reading this passage who knows the sacrificial system, right? They live in Israel, they go to the temple, maybe the tabernacle before the temple's built. They've been taught through the Levites the book of Leviticus. They know how to bring offerings. They know how to bring sacrifices, and they know there's a difference. They know that an offering doesn't have to be blood. None of them would read this story and say that there was a problem with Cain bringing grain. The author is not writing this story in such a way that Cain's bringing anything less than his best. Because he's not a shepherd. He doesn't have sheep. As far as the story is concerned, he's a farmer, and the best of what he grows and has to offer the Lord is what he brought. This is actually a trick question. There is nothing wrong with what Cain brings as an offering. So one, you have to know the distinctions between offerings and sacrifices. This is not a sacrifice. It is a perfectly legitimate offering to the Lord to bring grain. Go read Leviticus 2. The problem is not with what he brought. The problem is with the man who brings it. As we will see in the following verses, because he has a reprehensible response to his brother because of God. So, verse 5b, Cain is angry at the results not being in his favor. And I do like the way it says God looked with favor on Abel's and not with Cain's. So, verses 6 and 7, God talks to Cain about his attitude of anger and how to go about correcting the qualities in himself so he too can be acceptable like Abel. That's what this conversation in verses 6 and 7 are about. Why are you upset? If you do what is right, won't you be accepted? But if you don't do what is right, sin's lurking at your door. It's desire to have you, but you must rule over it. Look, this is actually a fairly simple thing to fix, Cain. And we'll talk about why Cain doesn't fix it. Okay, so verse 8, Cain rejects God's direction, and he kills his little brother rather than owning up to his own shortcomings. So the problem is with Cain's offering is that he doesn't have a humble and contrite heart about offering things to God. For Cain, it's a matter of going through the ritual and expecting to get the reward, only to find out that God sees through his attitude and he fails to achieve what he assumed he could get automatically. Oh, if I just bring my offering to God, God has to accept it. God has to look with favor on it. And that's not true. Even when it's a valid offering, that's the key. You have to see Cain's offering as a valid thing, and God's still not accepting it, because it would be a very important lesson for a Hebrew reading Genesis to understand that. It is something that the prophets were constantly telling people. God looks beyond the external. He sees the motivations of our hearts. He knows when you're bringing an offering just to try and treat him like a genie, just to try and get his favor or win something out of him, because or use him in some way. The whole point of the law, the sacrificial system, and what the prophets are harping about in the Old Testament is that God must be approached with the right heart inside of us. The actions, for the actions without to be the rituals and stuff that we do, the prayers that we pray, the songs that we sing. If it's going to be found pleasing to God, as the author of Hebrews says, without faith it's impossible to please God. He doesn't say without blood sacrifices it's impossible to please God. He says you can't please God with whatever you bring, no matter how legitimate it might be. You can't please God if you don't come with the right inner character and motivations. The murder of Abel by Cain does not come out of nowhere. This is the thing. God sees through Abel and Cain's motivations. He understands that Cain doesn't actually care about God. He has no real regard for him, which he's going to prove the second God doesn't favor him the way he expects to be favored. God can always see through our motives. He knows when you come to church and you're just there. He knows when you're not engaging with him. He knows when you're 2 seconds away from falling asleep and your wife swats you and wakes you up and stuff, right? Everybody else in the room knows it too, but God especially knows it. He knows when we're just going through the motions. For Cain, he's just going through a ritualistic motion. He's bringing an offering because he knows he's supposed to. His offering is legitimate, but his heart is not. So whatever it looked like for God to show favor towards Abel, regard for Abel, and not for Cain, Cain's going to show through his actions killing Abel that God was actually right not to just automatically accept it. God is not a genie. You do not put an offering coin into the bucket and then get your God favor out. I'm sorry, the Catholics are just wrong. You do not go through the works, sacrifices, sacraments. Thank you, Jared. You don't go through the sacraments and partake the Lord's Supper and get grace. That is wrong. Right here from the beginning of the 4th chapter of the Bible, that story is being taught to us, and Israel needed to learn it back then, so they included it in the prologue and passed it down in their storytelling. Christians need to learn it today. You can swipe that check. You can send in all the money in the world to the church. The church does not owe you anything in return. It does not have to do what you want with the money just because you gave it. And God, if the church doesn't have to do anything with it, God certainly doesn't have to do anything with it that you think he should. And I've had people in my first church who, the older generation at that church, they paid the bills. So they were going to get what they wanted. And what they wanted was 5 hymns from the hymnal with piano and organ and a choir. And how dare you bring a guitar to Sunday morning? When you pay the bills, you can get what you want out of it. Well, that's great. We've just made the entire service about these people who think that because they bring this offering to God, that God owes them the Sunday morning that they want. And that church was dying and dying and dying. This was 2012 when I left, so I don't know where they're at. They're still standing. But the point remains the same. People don't owe you anything because of what you do for them. And if you do things for people to use people and get out of them what you want, you are no different than Cain. And if you're willing to treat God that way, hey, God, I'll do this, but quid pro quo, if I do this, I expect this in return. You don't really love God. You don't really have regard for God. Do not expect God to have regard for you. You can never please God or bring an acceptable sacrifice to Him through mechanical ritual. And it doesn't matter what rituals they are. Even His self-prescribed laws under Moses are not things that you can just mechanically do and expect God to be happy about it. You must possess genuine allegiance, faith in God. God, I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing this because I want to. I'm offering a burnt offering in Leviticus 1 for my sins, and now that you have atoned for my sins, Lord, I want to spend some time with you, so here's another animal for us to sit down and have a meal with. And I don't have to even offer. This is a free will offering, because I just want to come and spend some time with you, God, of my limited time on earth, because death has now been instituted. I want to spend a little time with you. To do that, here's a sacrifice for us to share together. A meal for us to share together. That's proper faith and allegiance to God. Cain doesn't have that. So the story about Cain and Abel is actually about proper worship. Proper worship is not about bringing the right or wrong thing to God, necessarily, because what both brothers bring isn't acceptable as an offering. God doesn't need either one anyways. He doesn't need the grains. He doesn't need the fats of the animals. So it's not about that. Where Abel comes with a proper heart towards God, Cain does not. Therefore, his offering is not as acceptable as his brother's. God's words to him in verses 6 and 7 explain this to Cain, but he doesn't want to hear any of it because Cain has the heart and mind of a dark lord. The problem with Cain is not his offering. The problem with Cain is Cain. Cain has the heart and mind of a dark lord. And what do I mean by dark lord? If you read any good sci-fi, fantasy, fiction stuff, the bad guy is always somebody who never learns his lesson, doesn't think that he's the problem, always thinks his own superiority and specialness means he can do whatever he wants without consequences, and if anything goes wrong, it's not his fault, it's always somebody else's fault. So the heart of any dark lord is always fundamentally the same. I'm special, right? I have nothing to learn. There are no qualities I lack that I need to develop because look at me. Am I right? If there's a problem, it's with you or it's with the circumstances. We just need to tweak the circumstances. But I can't be the problem. Everything has to always fit my current and unchanging perception of the world because I'm the best. I have no need to do anything new, which is why I should rule and I should have my way always and forever. Amen. The reason why stories like Harry Potter are so iconic and clever is because you have a dark lord, Voldemort, who, despite all the power that he has in this world, the guy just cannot learn a single lesson. And this is what Dumbledore is constantly trying to teach Harry. Look, Harry, you fought Voldemort on the night that he came back, but your wand beat his. And when he showed up the next time, Voldemort borrowed a wand thinking that I was just the wand's problem. Instead of actually looking at himself and wondering what characteristics you had, namely courage, that faced off against his fear and beat his lust for power and won against his wand. Instead of actually doing that, he just thought, well, it's the wand's problem. I just need to find a different wand, so I'll borrow a wand. Oops, that wand didn't work, so I guess I'm going to go on the hunt for the Elder Wand, and I'm going to find the most powerful wand ever, because it's not me. I'm Tom Riddle. I'm Voldemort. I'm Slytherin's heir. I'm not the problem. It's the wand or it's this Harry guy. He's got to go. It can't be him. I mean, it can't be me, so it must be him. I'm special, which is what you get if you read The Half-Blood Prince. For like little 11-year-old Tom Riddle, it's like, I always knew I was special. And because of that, I can kill whoever I want. And finally, in the final face-off between Harry and Voldemort, Harry's like, come on, Tom, try for some remorse. What? What are you talking about? It's like, you're just going to lose this fight again because you never learn your lesson, do you? You do not understand. You're repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. Dumbledore and Voldemort have this fight over and over again. The problem is, Tom, you don't think that love is as important as it is. You don't value love. So you're not looking at anything but power. And power doesn't actually help you. Love overcomes power. Childlike innocence and faith in stories overcomes evil in this world. It defeats the Dark Lord. Hobbits can defeat Sauron because Sauron thinks that just amassing a great army in Mordor is enough. But they can come up with a plan, give the ring to a little hobbit, and that little hobbit can make his way all the way to Mordor and defeat the Dark Lord, Sauron, because Dark Lords fundamentally never learn their lesson. They never look at themselves and see, what qualities do I need to work on? What things do I need to practice better? What things do I need to change about my thinking? To Cain, everything that matters is about what is external. I approach God with an offering. It's a ritual. What does it matter what's in my heart? God, you're supposed to accept my offering regardless of the state of my heart. If I do the ritual, I must be accepted automatically. God is not allowed to reject me or tell me no. And he becomes a tantruming little child because he didn't get his way. And, how often do kids try to manipulate things they tell adults by telling adults what they want to hear? Oh, I'm in trouble? Oh, I'm sorry, Mom. What do you mean I'm still in trouble? I said I was sorry. It's like, yeah, but that's the thing. You can't just apologize. You actually have to face the consequences of your actions. Cain is being told here the consequences of his actions. And when God comes along and judges him, he will be told the other consequences of his actions. And his whole attitude is going to be like, that's unfair. People are going to hurt me now. As if he doesn't deserve it. And God's actually going to let him live, graciously put a mark on him to keep him alive and stuff. Like, if God was 100% just all the time, if he was pure justice without mercy, I should say, because he is 100% just all the time, then none of us would live beyond our first sin, which means we would all pretty much die the moment we were born. Or at least could learn to walk and talk. But like every other child, Cain thinks he's not the problem and has nothing to learn. The question is, when you're in conflict with other people, or when you're in conflict with God, or you're just upset with God, do you always assume it's other people that are the problem? How quick are you to turn and say, okay, maybe I didn't do that the best. Maybe they're 99% of the problem, but you got to take accountability and responsibility for that 1% in which you are a problem. If you don't, you think everybody and everything is 100% the problem, I'm 100% not the problem, and you're a dark lord. Cain is the first example of this, which is why he's a terrible person. Do not emulate him and kill your siblings.